We're back with Dr. Bob Milligan. This time, we're discussing how to build your workforce through hiring. Bob, could you please start by telling us what you do?
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to talk about this topic of hiring. I'm Dr. Bob Milligan. I'm a senior consultant with Dairy Strategies. I work with farm managers, agribusiness personnel on strategy, supervision, hiring, and other human resource topics. Before joining Dairy Strategies about 10 years ago, I spent 28 years on the faculty at Cornell University. Today, we want to talk about this critical issue of hiring. And we're going to address it by answering three questions. What is the financial impact of hiring practices? 2, how is our dairy and agricultural workforce changing? And 3, what is required to hire great employees?
That sounds great, Bob. Let's get started with what is the financial impact of hiring practices.
Typically, when we think about hiring and the cost of hiring, we think of the cost of turnover. An employee leaves for whatever reason, we have to spend some money hiring a replacement, and then we spend additional money training the person in that new position. But that really is not the full cost of hiring. The real issue of hiring, because some turnover is necessary and even good, the real cost is when we have a mishire, when our hiring practice failed in the sense that we hired someone who did not have the skills to succeed in the position. In that case, not only do we have the cost of turnover, we have the cost of having an employee who is underperforming in the job for a day, a week, a month, maybe even a year. And so the real objective in hiring is to minimize the cost of a mishire. Before we really get back to addressing that issue, we have to understand more about the workforce. And so let's think about how is our dairy and agricultural workforce changing. To address that issue, we first have to recognize that our traditional labor pool in agriculture, young white males, is a declining proportion of the workforce. First of all, young people have been a declining proportion of the workforce for the last 50 years. There's a slight turnaround today, but it never will return to the point that it was when the baby boomers were young. Secondly, we're getting a more diverse workforce in many ways. The first way is that we have more women in the workforce. The workforce is becoming higher proportion of women. And the second part of the diversity is that we're getting an increasing proportion of people in the workforce who are Black, Hispanic, Asian American, and American Indian. So the bottom line is that our workforce is becoming much more diverse, and our hiring practices must recognize that.
So, Bob, could you tell us what are the characteristics of this changing workforce?
Thank you, Karen. One of the most important characteristics is that young people today are of a different generation. They're Gen Xers, they're millennials, they have had different life experiences. And those life experiences have led them to look for a job that has meaning. They're no longer willing to work in a job just because it's a job. They want to contribute something. Now, that's actually an opportunity for us in agriculture. Feed the world, provide great food for people, families just like us. Whatever it is that your vision and mission is to be able to articulate that and utilize it to attract these young people from today's generations. Another key part of the workforce in dairy and in agriculture is that the size of the undocumented workforce is declining. Improving economic conditions in Mexico, a decreasing birth rate in Mexico, increased border security, potentially immigration reform are all changing the dynamics of the undocumented workforce. So the reality is that our workforce is changing. Our hiring practices have to adjust to recruit and select in that workforce. So our third question is what is required to hire great employees? The first part of that is probably the most difficult. And that is that we have to make it a priority. When someone leaves, we all have to work harder because there's less people available to do the same amount of work. At the same time, we have the additional time and energy that's required in hiring. This makes it very difficult to give hiring the priority it requires. But if we want to reduce that probability of a mishire, we have to do that. The second thing, and it actually helps with the first one, is to have some structures in place, have processes in place that we can fall back on, that we can utilize to have great hiring processes when in fact it is time to fill a position, either because it's a new position or because we've had someone leave. Hiring then requires three pieces: preparation, recruitment, and selection. We often forget about the preparation. We often start by writing a want ad. That's a huge mistake, because the first thing we have to think about is, are there parts of this position that someone else already in our workforce is ready to step up to, would be more interested in than what they're doing? So we have to begin by looking at the job descriptions of our current employees, at least those in the same area as the hire, and then we need to write a job description so we know what we're searching for in the new employee. We then have to move to recruiting. I often hear people say, I can't find good help. Now let's for a minute think about, what does that really mean? It really means one of two things. One is there's no one available that can succeed in this position. Although that's an easy answer, it really sounds pretty unlikely. So the other answer then is that our recruitment is not attracting candidates who can succeed in the position. That means we have to focus on recruitment. What is recruitment? It's obtaining a great pool of candidates by successfully marketing. That key word is marketing. Marketing the attributes of your dairy and the position you have available. We're marketing our position in order to get a great pool of candidates. The third piece is then selection. When I talk to people about selection, I sometimes hear, we just talk while I show the candidate around. Selection needs to have some structure, needs to be formal. Just having a bullshit session is not going to minimize the probability of a mishire. And then we end up with people who cannot succeed in the position, and increase stress for owners. So what is selection? Well, it's the choice of the candidate or two candidates from the pool. And what we're doing is we're matching the competencies, the experience, the skill, the knowledge, the attributes, the behavior of the individuals in the pool with those needed to succeed in the position. So in summary, we've talked about three questions. The financial impact is that we have to really focus on minimizing the probability of a mishire. We have to recognize that our dairy and agricultural workforce is changing, and the first thing that's really important to hiring great employees is to give it a priority, to have some structures so that we can prepare, we can recruit and select to hire that great employee who will contribute to the success of our business. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this very important topic of hiring.
Thank you, Bob. That was a great breakdown on how to improve hiring for dairy operations. If you'd like to learn more about managing human resources, view other webinars and articles by Bob Milligan at www.progressivedairy.com. Thank you for your time today.